Muhammadiyah feels special. In opening opposition, we have Stanley, Kubrick, or Shipper. In closing government, we have Beha. And in closing opposition, we have Munismus C. Judging me, Reni as chair, and Kahans, Kahanu, Tiara, and Kahuma. So without further ado, I call the first speaker of opening government. Time is yours.
Panels, damaging economic policies as a government means that they want to take much debt on from IMF, for example, or even from USA in huge budget that are not really appropriate for the society explicitly. Like they want to empower youth to build their company like startup and so on and so forth, or even they want to improve facilities that are not accessibility for the society underground. Therefore, we are really regret this kind of the policies that at the end of the day it will make the society suffer at the end of the day. Here's the thing that how that empower you to build their company is not really appropriate, because in the problem status quo that we cannot guarantee that the success of the startup of millennial will sustain, because the competition underground within the society, like all of the people have a startup that therefore as a startup they should follow the trend of the society, or even the demand of the society, meaning that the possibility of the successability of the startup it will less likely to happen, under comparison that we should prioritize another sector, for example. So here's our goals. Clear that it's okay to intervene the steps that lead to create a better humanitarian, and second, that welfare of the society underground. Here's the thing. First, why sovereignty can be intervened to begin with? Because first, it hurts all of the people underground. The moment we betray the economic policies underground, because they had to access the economy, for example, on how the price on the market, for example, getting higher and higher, for example, at the end of the day, it will suffering all the society underground, and also how that humanitarian crisis like government in Syria, for example, that just because of this humanitarian crisis, it will lead to economic crisis. It will trigger the society will living under unwelfare. Second of all, why then sovereignty it's okay to be intervened? Because the politicians make their own decision in parliament without involve the society, because they should fulfill their because what the drama on the parliament that first, they always fulfill their own interest to begin with. Even a second, that they should prioritize their community, for example, or they should prioritize the value. They should prioritize the value of their party, for example. Therefore, check and balance or even criticism can be happen under their side. And second, on how check and balances and criticism can happen, they can monopolize the media to shut down the society for not critic the government, because they have a power to control in many sectors in a state, for example, or even in the last that they using military action. Military action, like to shut down the criticism, like they put the higher, like they put the highest taxes, for example, to fulfill the own interest politician or even rich people on that country. So here's the thing, that our alternative will be happen under our side. First, that we want to embargo or boycott in terms of economic, if there is a state that doing this damaging economic. Second, that we want to cut the bilateral in terms of political view. And second, that it will regard international cut, like we want to punish the leader itself. So this debate will turn whether or not it's justified for us to intervene or not. So and the last is why it's most likely will be happen at the end of the day. Because those countries will be less likely to change their policy because of this punishment. For example, that at the end they will trying to change the policy that appropriate for the society, that the policy that can be the policy that can be adopted coming from the society. Because as the state to sustain your country, you need bilateral in terms of economic and politics. So the moment we punish this kind of states or even leader, it will trigger also another country to have a good economic policies at the end of the day. We are very proud to propose.
5 minutes and 29 seconds. Now I call leader of opposition. Time is yours. Here.
It is not clear from opening government whether they want to go with invasive invasion like military action, or they want to go to non-invasive action like economic embargo. So I think that they need to resolve that in their side. As opening opposition, we want to focus on two things. We want to prove to you why this is not good for both countries who are going to invade and who will be invaded. And secondly, invasion only hurt all of us. But before that, responses. In their cases, they want to take the examples of like when the damaging economic policy, like when the country take the IMF debt for empowering the establishing of startup. We think this is very weird. I mean, IMF have their own consideration. They doesn't necessarily give you the debt. So we don't think that this is necessarily be implemented. But even if they give this IMF, there is always check and balances from international community, from IMF. I don't get the idea how opening government are going to run in this way. Secondly, sovereignty. They say that, well, we can like strip off the sovereignty of the country because, you know, it suffer people, politician is being so fucked up. Firstly, we think that we agree. I mean, if these people suffering the individuals, we need to react. But we think that their reaction is going to hurt people underground even more, because what they are going to do is military invasion, ladies and gentlemen, which kills people, which makes people which makes tension even higher in their side. But secondly, even if this policy they are talking about is policy like protectionism, within it, even though this is damaging, it is not directly affecting people, which means that this is gradually happening. So we think that we still have time for any other alternatives, which I will talk in my speech, ladies and gentlemen. So going to my point, so when it comes to the criteria to judge whether intervention is justified or not. Number two, when the country doesn't want to cooperate. So let's take example of North Korea. Well, in status quo, we can still engage in terms of bilateral talk. In the status quo, we can quell how Kim Jong-un dealing with the dispute in South China Sea. With the bilateral engagement, for example, trade war between US and China, within that we are still resorting into talk between US government. Like we are still lobbying tariff imposition happening right now. Like US still lobbying how China imposes tariff on soybeans export from China. But right now, here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. If we go to the side of opposition, they wanna still continue this trade war. For example, like US still putting a ban on Huawei technology infrastructure, like not allowing network equipment to get into US. We think that invasion in their side only increasing tension, ladies and gentlemen. Like United States will, what happened, ladies and gentlemen, that there will be like increasing of tariff imposed from China to US, US to China, ladies and gentlemen. Who we hurt at most in status quo? Individuals at the underground. For example, like local farmer, US farmer who rely so much their production and efficiency from using cheap technology. Exactly, coming from China, individual who they want to invite, ladies and gentlemen. What happened, right, if we still continue with that, we think that we are hurting individuals to have more productive economy, for example, in US, like how they can make sure that their production be efficient, how they can make sure that they can continue life in their condition, ladies and gentlemen. We think that economic policy, the effect is not imminent. It happened gradually. There is an economic transition. The inflation happens so slow, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't think there is an imminent threat right now. So we don't think that right now we have some sort of urgency in order to actually going to have this invasion that what opening government would like to pursue. We think that right now that alternative that we have is quite lucrative. We can talk. We have international community. We can using UN to have like avenue to mediate the talk. These options are available anyway. But even if it fails, we think that the casualties in our side is more marginal. Why? Because in their side, what are they going to do is they're going to create massive chaos inside the country. They will destroy infrastructure. They destroy the cohesion within the society. They make military get into the country, raping people, doing a lot of casualties, which in their side, this kind of thing they should defend. And they should tell us why the trade-off of this kind of thing is much better. Yes?
We already mentioned that the countries invading will follow international humanitarian law, like Geneva Convention. And in the worst case of North Korea, 3 generations have ruled and no changes have been made. Why is that better on your side?
Yeah, but not all countries in your side agreeing and adhering to international humanitarian law. If you are dealing with country who doesn't want international humanitarian law, in your side you lose it anyway. I don't get how that in your side you're going to get all these benefits. Secondly, we think that in current status quo we have very cohesive international community, like we have ASEAN, we have North Atlantic Treaty, and etc., which we think that it is so meaningful right now in terms of creating peace and creating cohesion within the international community. I don't get, in their side, they have to prove to us why all these measures, all this international community pressure and organization is not going to work, and how in their side that this particular organization will not help this country. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have proven to you in today's debate, we have proven to you that how we think that we can still have alternatives, and this alternative is meaningful and lucrative. Number 2, why we think that invasion in their side is going to be really, really harmful to all individuals. So that's why we beg to oppose.
Now I call the Deputy Prime Minister. Time is yours.
ladies and gentlemen, my problem with opening opposition, they are not having any alternative at all on how they ensure that if these already severely damaging policies has already implemented, the impact is going to be just the same, how they are going to solve the conflict under the side of the house. In our side of the house, if we will prove to you that there will be no any next stakeholder to do the same thing, meaning that if we do like embargo in order to intervene that kind of country or any other option in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen, it will create improving of those kind of countries, because most likely this stakeholder, like the one who involves to make these economic policies, will change the behavior and will really represent the society on the ground itself, right? Second of all, ladies and gentlemen, they talk to you that it actually hurts the sovereignty and so on and so forth itself. Like North Korea, you cannot actually intervene with the North Korea because North Korea is not part of UN at the very first place itself. It is actually not true, ladies and gentlemen, because ladies and gentlemen, if you are going to talk, and the alternative is that you are going to talk with the North Korea, in their side of the house, they have to prove to me how North Korea will most likely hear your suggestion or hear your advice at the very first place itself, ladies and gentlemen. Why we think is that the reason why we want to intervene to those kind of policies, for example, because it's already condemned universally, like universally action at the very first place itself. We can actually draw the same line with the humanitarian crisis at the very first place, where the impact is going to be much bigger under the side of the house itself. If the international society has already condemned this kind of behavior, then we are actually still justified to do so under the side of the house itself, right? But last of all, ladies and gentlemen, if they say that they have alternative as well, like economic transition, for example, and so on and so forth itself, meaning that if you already have a severely damaging impact at the very first place, I doubt where the capital you are going to take in order to improve or fix your problem at the very first place itself. Meaning that, ladies and gentlemen, in their side of the house, there will be no any capital at all, because it's already severely damaging the damaging economy. So I don't think that that's going to solve their problem. Moreover, it's just going to increase more casualties under the side of the house, and that's why it's actually really bad at the very first place itself. But the next thing itself, ladies and gentlemen, on the next thing we would like to say, even if sovereignty is very, very important for all the countries on the ground, we think that, ladies and gentlemen, it is still justified for us to do so, because we think that this policy doesn't really represent the people on the ground. Most likely, this policy is actually made up by all the politicians in the parliament, doesn't really care to the people. So, for example, the tax really higher for people, for example, in order to cater the interest of the elites people or politicians at the very first place. So we really think, ladies and gentlemen, it is not still justified. But even if criticism still exists under the side of the house, because probably they would like to say that this policy is going to be damaging, then most likely, because it's already favor the interest of the elite people, so most likely, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of like politicians will be most likely too easy to shut down this kind of criticisms at the very first place itself by in order to maintaining their own power at the very first place itself, ladies and gentlemen. But the next thing itself, even if sovereignty is important, it's just going to be equal, because the policy in your side of the house will just prolong the suffering of the people, for example. So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that their policy at the very first place itself is going to be damnly good at the very first place itself. But the next thing itself, ladies and gentlemen, what's gonna happen after we actually intervene to this kind of country, for example? We think that most likely, if we intervene to this kind of country, for example, we do the embargo or even like any other option in the status quo, as long as we intervene, for example, we think that it will create a sense of deterrence effect for other stakeholders or even other politicians on the status quo, that to be more selective is to be more like rational or thoughtful itself in order to create their policy. How's that possible? Because you create a signs that we are not on your side. You create a signs that it will really it will not only it will also hurt you at the very first place, because if you do the embargo, it will not it will also hurt you as a politician. For example, you cannot fulfill your own needs, or even you cannot actually pursue your other interests. So most likely, if you cannot pursue your other interests, these kind of stakeholder or politicians will be most likely to change, will be most likely hear our voice at the very first place itself, ladies and gentlemen, because this kind of politician will not have any capital at all to do so itself, right? But what happened as well? If we do not intervene, right? In their side of the house, it will create other problems. What's going to be most likely to happen is that the issue of conflict that's going to be like there will be separatist movement to actually goes against their own government at the very first place. We think that it is actually really bad at the very first place because this separatist movement not only hurting those kind of country inside of it, but also any other country might be possibly threatened as well. This is exactly probably the issue of the terrorists, for example, will be much more like the issue of the terrorists of ISIS, for example, will be much more recruiting these other people, for example, to really hate that government, and this ISIS will have any alternative way as well in order to go against USA or so on and so forth itself, ladies and gentlemen. That is exactly, it will not just harm this kind of country, but also possibly to any other country because the conflict is already sporadic and the conflict is already spreading under the side of the house itself, right? But what happened as well, the last thing, what happened as well, if we implement this kind of thing embargo, most likely if they are going to change, they are going to be more catering to their own society, for example. They are going to be more selective in making this policy to be really suit with the people. So what happened is that these kind of people, at least in our side of the house, their own needs will be more hurt or even, ladies and gentlemen, the needs itself is going to be fulfilled under our side of the house. Most likely, government will be more cooperate with their own society, and therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is going to work hand in hand between the politicians and the society. Because I think that the politicians in the ground, the reason why they implement this kind of severely damaging policies in order to create their own interests, like it is not really representing the people on the ground. That is exactly that. Take this debate. Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister spent time 7 minutes and 4 seconds. Now I call Deputy Leader of Opposition, time is yours.
Tes.
We think that the urgency has not been answered yet by the government side of the house. We think that when you would like to do an intervention, then you have to have the justification of how severe the problem is and why economy policy is that severe, how suffer people are in there, ladies and gentlemen. Because in status quo, when people would like to do invention means they have to see how gross humanitarian violation, for example, in there, do the genocide happen, for example, etc., ladies and gentlemen. And we don't think that that's the burden of proof that they brought in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. Second of all, their burden is also to explain to us why when invention happened, why the state would like to change in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Because even in status quo right now, if you would like to see US and China trade war is not resolved yet. In their side, they're defending USA to keep increasing the tariff and how that people are suffering, like how Pak Akbar have already told you. If we would like to see USA and China are a country that would like to have the world economy hegemony, that they would like to establish power and they would like to have the power of leading the country economy and the world economy, ladies and gentlemen. So we believe that these countries are not the characterization of countries that would like to change in the end of the day, even if you are invading them, because they think that they're that powerful, they think that they're that capable in, for example, just giving back retaliation towards the country that would like to invade them in the end of the day. What it costs to the local societies and the local communities that we told you that will be hurt hurted in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Lastly, this debate, they said there will be separatists. At least in our side of the house, we do not increase the harm, we do not increase the tension by invading them, ladies and gentlemen. But this debate is about economic policy that damaging, not how the community that would like to separate from the country in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. But talking about invention, when you do the invention, it does not necessarily mean that you will have the absolute win and the state would change in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Because military intervention only harm the grassroots society that we told you, not the elitist people and the people who are in power and taking the decision, ladies and gentlemen. It will harm the grassroots society. The elitists, they have, for the elitist people, they in the end of the day will have the options to just opt out from these kinds of things, ladies and gentlemen. They will not feel the harm in the end of the day. So my extension will be talking to you why the grassroots society will feel the harm, and the elitists and people who are in power and taking this decision will only just get away and be power and achieving their dream of being a powerful economy world. So enacting damaging economy policy creates response of retaliation back to the country, and it hurts us or a state and a local as well as the grassroots people. This policy invaded by countries whose interest is to make other countries deterred, for example, or most likely incentivize this other country to do retaliation. How? The likelihood is this, because they want to not only defending their prices but also would like to offend their prices to the enemy. Example like China imposing tariff to soybean, for example, US imposing the tariff to the Huawei too, ladies and gentlemen. So let's characterize the products that are given the tariff and tariffs to begin with in status quo. Most likely these products are products that are imported from other countries. The thing imported from other countries are things that are important because they don't have it. Materials that the materials that enhance the economic cycle, like farmers need the Huawei, etc., etc. The materials are hardly substituted. It is exclusively can only be operated if we have this complementary product in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So it is product that we cannot produce or get on ourselves, considering the inherent characterization of states that has their own competitive advantage, even their own absolute advantage of natural resources, for example, like USA has the agriculture and the China has the raw materials and the minerals, and that other country cannot be able to have that and cannot be able to operate that in the end of the day. So what does this product use for? Exactly to complete the technology to increase the efficiency and the efficacy of product producing. Example like farmer using Huawei for their technology to improve the production and tracking the goods, for example. In times of invasion and enacts severely damaging economy policy, it hurts the farmer, the local society, and the most vulnerable actor that would like to protect in today's debate, ladies and gentlemen. Their business is distracted. Their option is to purchase it with higher price, means they have to sell their product with higher prices, or they are gambling of selling it with just small amount of benefit they could get. But this option is not optionable, right? Because they have to purchase the technology with expensive price in the end of the day. The simple basic logic of pricing, if the production cost is higher, the price you sell would be higher too. This harms directly the local and the grassroots level society, not the elitist people. We are not the elitist people. We are not talking about Starbucks, for example, or more privileged who can just get away with this. But local communities that really rely upon the imported products, that is the only thing that can complete their production cost in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So this policy is not only this policy is not also only damaging the local traders inside of our country, but this policy also harm the people who are also doing the trading with us. For example, if you are having the spending toward invading with the military spending, for example, the military spending in status quo is very, very big. In USA back then spent so much money in invading Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen, so they would most likely causing and budgeting their money on military intervention more in comparison just thinking about their local communities that is very hurted inside of status quo, ladies and gentlemen. This also harms countries who are weak economically and rely upon importing products from these countries who are getting severely damaging economy policy, ladies and gentlemen. So in the end of the day, this policy of invention, if you would like to do this, you would not only see that you would not see the local communities that would be harmful, but you will only think about your interest of becoming, for example, the market hegemony inside of status quo, but not only thinking about the people inside of your country that will be hurted by this. Because in the end of the day, in status quo, you can see that USA communities and USA people in grassroots level, they do not prefer the policy of intervention towards the Afghanistan, etc., etc., ladies and gentlemen. They prefer themselves to be protected, and they prefer themselves to be given the budgeting of economy more, ladies and gentlemen. This is to show to you that invasion in status quo does not cater the interest of the society in the grassroots level, but only cater the interest of elitist people who would like to make the who would like to have the image of being powerful, and etc. in the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So in the end of the day, in this status quo, we protect the most vulnerable actor that is very, very impactful by this status quo, by this motion, and that is why the motion falls. Thank you.
It's been 10 times 6 minutes and 42 seconds. Now I call member of government. Time is yours. Take care.
Apa?
What opening opposition doesn't realize that these types of discrimination and systematic oppressions also can be considered as a systematic genocide. We as the closing government say that this is a type of the oppressions made by the government that we should engage. If we stick with the opening opposition's alternative, that we cannot opt out from those types of oppression, no alternatives, people continuing suffering, without knowing they are suffering, without knowing they are dying, they just starving. What we are as closing governments want to champion in this debate is we want to define this as a justified mechanism for us to invade, and second of all, why even if we are invading them, it is a good policy and it will result to good outcome. Several clarification. First, what do we mean by severely damaging policy is first, it creates a poverty on several layers. Second of all, it creates a better redistribution such as corruptions or many people that has been not able to access their basic needs, and etc. etc. Second clarifications that we are not specify who will authorize this particular attack, but whoever it is, first there should be deliberations on it. Second, they should follow the Geneva conventions. Means they are have to defining who are the invaders that they want to attack. Means the invaders who want to attack those particular countries, which it is the country that has not been that has done the human rights violations before. Because if they claim so, that's not the debate on these particular issues. Because the characteristics of the country that, or the characteristics of this policy means whoever who wants to going to invade those particular nations should able to be controlled. They should be controlled whether or not they want to. They are having done human rights violation and they are not. And I will prove to you why it is going to be okay in our side. So third clarification, we're not invading countries like Timor-Leste, for example, or countries like countries that has been severely poor. It is not because it is not because of their bad economic policy. Simply they are not having the resource, and that's not the countries that we want to engage to. Two analysis in my speech. First, why it is a good why invasion is justified method to respond to government severely damaging economic policy. Second, why it is a good policy and will get a good outcome. Or third argument, why it will create deterrent effect to so many countries in the future. First, why it would go why it is justified method to respond to government severely damaging economic countries. First of all, the society is already or principally already relying to the government to make sure that the government can sustain their life. And the government fail because those particular basic needs cannot be fulfilled by those particular government. What is ideal government that should be done in the status quo? First, the ideal government, they should fulfill their basic needs, but even if in the conditions that the government cannot fulfill their basic needs, at the very least, those countries try so much to fulfilling their basic needs. Thus, in those conditions, we don't want to engage to it. What we mean by severely bad economic decision means they are being corrupt, the economic their government has been corrupt, they are being irrational in giving military spending. Third of all, they are potentially killing citizens by making the citizens starving in the grassroots society, ladies and gentlemen. If they claim that the economic policy is not damaging, they say it is gradual. Exactly. Us closing government, we say because it is gradual, the people in the grassroots doesn't realize that they are living in a horrific world. They doesn't realize that they cannot buy food. It is because the systematic oppression of the government. They doesn't realize that it is the result of the government corruption, so on and so forth. That is to say that this government is fucked up. We are justified to invade them. Second justification, no thank you. How's the attack we're going to go? First, we're going to doing diplomatic talks. We also give them guidance. We give them the perspective on how the ideal world is going to be. Second of all, we are also offering them financial capability to financial support to solve those particular issue. If they are not capable to solve the issue, we are going to boycott them. We're going to give economic sanction to them, and thus we are going to harm them. But if the country doesn't cooperate, then it's the time for them to attack them. But notice, we still announce that we want to deploy troops, but we don't specify the details. The reason why this is important, I'm going to explain to you in my second argument. Why it is a good policy and why it will get a great outcome. Now, thank you. First of all, it is a good policy because we want to say that we are still following international humanitarian law. Means the process of attack, it is still a justified process. What is the characteristics of justified process? First, they have a proper amount of troops. Second of all, they are not attacking women and children. Third of all, they are not shooting unarmed and harmless citizens. If they are starting to make a combat, we are just killing them. And the reason why it is justified, because it is the means of attacking. And later I will just explain to you why it is still effective. But the reason why it is feasible on the government or the entities to do so, or it is justified to changing the outcome inside of a particular society. But reasons because because the characteristics of country that want to do invasion is the countries like US. They have advanced technology, means they have just kidnap and secure the government without knowing it. Notice that there are success attacks like in Osama bin Laden also, or Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, showing that there are also a success attack or invasions in order for you to change a systematic government. But secondly, no thank you. The attack will be done selectively. Why this is important analysis? Because notice that this particular invasion is costly, means you should done it selectively because the amount of money that you spend on troops is very expensive. But second of all, why it could be done selectively, because the narrative of international security, if you are going to invade a country, then you should do it correctly. If you are do it not correctly, then you are be judged as the country who just deploying your troops and killing people, but doesn't necessarily why it is true. But the reason why it is effective policy, because first, the appearance of military troops give an element of surprise to both impacted actor. First actor is government. The government will be pressurized. They feel that there are big troops that are coming inside of them. But in society, the society will also be good because they already suffer to those particular regime. They are think that there should be a change. Thus, the invasion will be good. But even if they say there would be a retaliation, we say the retaliation is fake. Notice that in North Korea and China, they built a concentration camp. They built everything. They limit their people's right to speech. But in worst case, the people are dying. We say it is okay because it is better for you to die rather than not having a worthy life as the result of systematic oppressions. That it is why we should just invade them to make a better world. Thank you.
Sini.
Mr. Speaker, from the opening government, we do not find any severity why they need to do this kind of invader, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, I think that in our side, we are going to prove to you why it is not justifiable to do invade this certain country, ladies and gentlemen. And the second, their goals is about how to help this kind of humanitarian crisis. When the moment they do invade certain country, we are going to prove to you it will worsen. It will more arise in that kind of the humanitarian crisis in their side, ladies and gentlemen, that we are going to prove to you later. Okay, first, why it is not justifiable for this kind of country to invade certain country, ladies and gentlemen? Because we believe that the one who understands this certain country is that kind of the leader, ladies and gentlemen. No one understands that kind of the country because they do not live on that place, ladies and gentlemen. That kind of leader have experience to regulate well in this kind of country, ladies and gentlemen. They know what should do and what should doesn't, ladies and gentlemen. Moreover, when we talking about policy, there are the trade-off that we have to get, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe this kind of the country have another purpose, ladies and gentlemen. For example, they are going to such as focusing on and educate that kind of citizens. Therefore, they're taxing that kind of citizen by amount of number, big amount of number, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, I think it is still justifiable, ladies and gentlemen, because that kind of intentions is not evil intention. That kind of intentions is for the accumulative interest, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, maybe this kind of individual do not find the benefit, the fruit in current, but this is still okay for their future generation, ladies and gentlemen, because they are going to still have future generations. This is just like how basically the climate change policy, ladies and gentlemen. If you do not know, don't get now, maybe your next generation will find that kind of the benefit from this kind of policy, ladies and gentlemen. I think that it is not justifiable to invade this certain country, ladies and gentlemen. In their side, they try to generalize the reasons of this kind of country by such as proving that this country is very evil intentions. That kind of generalization is not justifiable, ladies and gentlemen. Like because they see just the author of this kind of the place, ladies and gentlemen. They do not directly see how basically the problem in this kind of the state, ladies and gentlemen. Moreover, if they have that kind of personal interest on themselves, ladies and gentlemen, such as invading the certain country, ladies and gentlemen, not purely to fight for that kind of the humanitarian crisis. And the second, why that's argument it shows to you that's not justifiable to invade certain country. And second, how basically this kind of invasions is not justifiable because it will create a larger, more harm, ladies and gentlemen. Before that.
If they make severely damaging policy, that means that they do not have rational calculation, cost-benefit analysis by making those decisions. Why intervention is not justified?
I think that this kind of individual have rational calculations because in this kind of conditions, it's not they should calculate everything, ladies and gentlemen. Because you generalize that every country in demographical country have the same, ladies and gentlemen. Every country is different, ladies and gentlemen. You couldn't generalize that. Maybe you couldn't generalize like US have the same environment with that kind of the North Korea and so on, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, this kind of the regulations, the only one who understands that kind of the regulations is that kind of the leader, ladies and gentlemen. That kind of the leader have intention to such as build that kind of the country, ladies and gentlemen. Because why? Because they are also scared at the end they will be such as toppled down. And that is the reason why that kind of the leader have intentions to build a certain country. And the second, why? Moving to my second argument, why it's more harm to invade certain country? Because we believe that the moment when you invade certain country or do embargo or military, most likely military interventions, means like in your side there is no like that you are going to waiting for. You wait for even if that can. In their side, that kind of the humanitarian crisis will be more. Why? Because the moment when such as you invade certain country, there will be military troops, and so far automatically there will be war, ladies and gentlemen. Considering that war is not the short-term period of time, ladies and gentlemen, but war will be long-term condition, ladies and gentlemen. It's not talk about month, it's not talk about a day, but it's talk about a period of a decade, or we couldn't wait until when this kind of war will be endless. Why? Because every citizens, every country have their backup. For example, in the moment in Syria, there is who backup such as there is coming from US, from ally of US, and there is coming from the Russia, ladies and gentlemen, who have interest on that kind of country. Therefore, that kind of the war will be more and creating that kind of the humanitarian crisis, ladies and gentlemen, because that kind of people are going to die on that kind of war. It is not about the amount of number when you once send the troop, but it's not how long you send that kind of the troops, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, the moment when you send the many troops, the many times send that kind of troops, automatically there are the huge number of troops that you send that die on the field, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, it is still outrage that kind of the humanitarian crisis, ladies and gentlemen. And moreover, in their side, when the moment you such as invest certain country, will distract such as economic, distract infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen, distract everything, ladies and gentlemen. And the moment, in our side, at least we have, when you do not invite, we have when this kind of the economy will be built up and so far, in their side, they distract that kind of the source of education, the source of economy, ladies and gentlemen, to make this kind of country, to make this kind of individual do not access this kind of economic and education anymore, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, I think it's worse in their side. And why? In their side, that kind of conditions will be worse because they couldn't prove to us how basically this kind of the invader will have hugely intention to consistent to help this kind of country, ladies and gentlemen. Because maybe, for example, in Donald Trump, maybe changing into another president, maybe that kind of interest will be different. See Donald Trump in current status quo, withdraw that kind of the trust from the Syria, ladies and gentlemen. That shows to you when the moment you invest certain country, you couldn't such as take the promises of your backup, that kind of the invader, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we believe that this kind of the promising for the future or the sustainability of this country, there is no light on their side. In our side, still have light because we such as do only these things such as build up economy by taxing this kind of individual and will be bright in the future. Therefore, I propose to.
Bukan Fuansa, bukan Brawijaya. Betul kok ya? Since I'm never going to compete in ADC, this is my only chance to wear an alma mater to a final. So, moving on. In today's debate, I'm going to deal with COO, then compare the government benches. Firstly, CO. Two problems from CO's case. Firstly, they said, well, nobody knows how to rule the country other than the leaders themselves. Firstly, if they fail atrociously like in the status quo, that means that maybe they know how to run the country for the benefit of the elites, for the benefit of the rulers. This exists in North Korea where they know how to run their country and people are okay with it, but they're not okay with it because they want to. They have been beat into submission because if they fight, they will die. So obviously they know how to run their country. Secondly, even so, they did not explain to us how they will convince those leaders to create better economic policies anyway. If they can, then we won't invade them. Secondly, they said that the war will be endless. 3 reasons why not. One, as Haikal said, this is going to be a surprise, or we're going to use very, very good war tactics to just take the leaders away. This has been successful in taking away Bin Laden and the leaders of ISIS. Secondly, we say in the status quo, when you're going to do war, it's called a war of attrition, where resources deplete and one side has to give up. Even in the status quo, the proof is that the invasion in Syria lasted only 4 years. Comparatively on their side, the economic deprivation they have can go on multiple generations like exists in North Korea. And as Haikal said, failure in economic policy is when the distribution is horrible. The problem with any of their solution is that boycotts and all that, it only harms the grassroots society, not the people making the decisions. That is to say, Kim Jong-un to this day is the highest importer of luxurious goods, because guess what? All the boycotts don't affect him, so there's no reason for him to change. And lastly, because economic will stay forever. Moving on to, not yet. Firstly, they said, well, it's the idea of sovereignty, people on the ground die. And they said that, well, economic policies are gradual. This is exactly the problem. Because it's gradual, nobody realizes how bad this is. They simply say, okay, it's fine that in Africa, it's normal for a woman to have 8 children, all of them die except for one, and when that person lives, they only live until 15 years old and then they die as well. This life is horrible on their side. This is the sort of economic deprivation that they are trying to defend. If they're okay with 7 people dying out of every single family, then they should be okay with us having a short time amount of war, because comparatively, it's not going to stop on their side. Secondly, they said that, well, not all the countries that invade follow the international humanitarian law. Firstly, if they don't follow that, then we're not debating about those countries, because regardless what you say, is it justified or not, they're going to invade. So countries like Russia, even if we follow this motion or not, they're still going to invade Ukraine anyway. That's a different debate altogether. We're talking about possibly regulating this and actually having laws and having discussion on who we are going to invade. Not yet. Moving on. They said that while in the status quo, invasions are criticized. We say that, exactly, because it's criticized, we are going to do it very, very selectively. No country is incented to do it randomly, because not only because of exactly what they said, it is very bad. But here's the problem. If you publicly say that you are not going to do any invasion, that means the leader of these countries have no fear, because they know, I can keep doing these severely damaging economic policies and nobody will stop me. It will make countries like Brunei no longer be about Brunei. It's going to be even worse as North Korea, because they know, okay, I know US is not going to invade me, then there's no reason for me to not do these severely damaging economic policies. We say that on their side of the house, not only do you lose the deterrence of fear because we will invade you, and invasion is the only thing that works because economic boycotts only affect the grassroots society, not the decision makers, but also they are now incented to do that because they know they will not be invaded whatever happens, and that is the only thing that can make them scared. Before we move on, yes?
People can die in underground for a myriad of reasons. Economic is only a minor part. Secondly, your case of invasion only valid if it is tantamount to genocide done by Nazi or in Rwanda. Tell me in detail why in your policy that huge mortality rate will happen.
We say that if it's severely damaging economic policies, then we say that it affects people's life. You can't buy food, you can't have access to clean water, you don't have education, you don't have ways to save yourself, you don't even know how to basically survive. That's basically the problem with severely damaging economic policies. Here's the problem. If they want to equate it to genocide, I already did that. If it's the problem is they only want genocide in an immediate sense, where, for example, 1 million people die. But if 10 million people die over the course of 10 years, we say that's equivalent of genocide that is generational. If they're okay with North Koreans dying for literally 3 generations, then what is 1 generation dying because of war how is 1 generation dying because of war any worse than that? Because if they cannot give you any solvency either, then we say that it is just as bad as genocide, because clearly people dying, basically the principle of genocide is a lot of people die. If a lot of people die because of these policies and there is no way to stop it, then it is okay for us to sacrifice some people in order to do this. Some wars are just, and we are going to do it as a just. This is exactly that just reason. So, it is clear from this debate. What did Haikal say that is very clearly important in this debate? Firstly, he is actually the one that introduced to you the idea of severely damaging economic policies where they are incredibly corrupt and the redistribution is bad, leading to starvation, meaning people die at a very young age. This already engages with OO's idea that it's gradual and it's not important. So on that point, we already engage with them. Secondly, we explain to you why it's justified, because we're just doing this as a last mechanism, and we already have all the steps before that in order to do that. If they don't want to do it, obviously they're the worst of the worst. And if they're the worst of the worst, that means that only the elites control that, and we have to give a threat to those people, and economic policies don't work. Lastly, if you actively say that you don't want to invade, then you give an active incentive for them to do this, because obviously they're not going to be invaded. What's my fear of doing these severely damaging economic policy? Lastly, we already explained to you why on the ground it is fine, because one, the society will most likely agree to do this because they have felt all of the oppression. If they say that there's retaliation maybe from people on the ground, that is only because they were beat into submission. The truth is they want actual lives. And we explained to you why they are going to do it very selectively because of the reasons of cost and international scrutiny. For all of those reasons, incredibly proud to oppose.
Now, I call the opposition leader.
I would like to talk two things in my speech. Number one is that the principle of engaging to the opening of a government, they claim that it is the point of justification, whether or not it's justified to invade and damage the sovereignty, and secondly, which one is the best way to solve this kind of problem, either by invade or other alternative that I will bring to you in my speech. But before that, engaging to the closing government, I don't agree the moment they define that the humanitarian crisis, for example, it is a form of oppression, ladies and gentlemen. We don't explain to you knowing that the root of the problems, why that humanitarian crisis happen, ladies and gentlemen. There is a lot of problems. It's not only because of economic policies coming from the state. Perhaps the problems happen is because that those states, they are poor states, ladies and gentlemen. They are vulnerable states. For example, this state that has been colonized for a long time, ladies and gentlemen. They already left behind from other countries. So we think that this leader, for example, need a long time on how to solve this kind of problem, because so many problems they have to fix and they have to solve, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that we cannot directly judge and directly punish by invade those kind of countries simply because did. But secondly, perhaps also because of inability of society to utilize and adapt with the economic policies that made by the state, ladies and gentlemen. So we think that we cannot directly judge and so on and so forth. But second response to the opening government, when they claim to you that by do not invade, it will prolong the suffering of society in that country, ladies and gentlemen. But I think no. Why? Because in this debate, we are not talking about, specifically talking about dictators' country. So it's perhaps democratic countries, right? What I am trying to say here is that perhaps there will be election, ladies and gentlemen. There will be re-elected a new government in that countries in which we suddenly change the policies making from the previous leader, for example. Why we think that it is most likely to suddenly change the policies, because they understand the problem of their state and they would like to solve. They would like to create a new nuance and create perhaps they are career politicians, so they would like to increase their reputation, for example, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. But third response is that they claim that economic transition or bilateral relation will not happen with the moment you don't have capitals, ladies and gentlemen. That is the claim coming from the opening government. But I think they never prove Why then? The prerequisite on having bilateral economic relations, each country have to need a capital, ladies and gentlemen. But I think no. The bilateral economic relation happen because of mutual benefit on both countries, ladies and gentlemen. So perhaps if even you don't have a capital, for example, but you have a comparative advantage, you have a good natural resources, so the bilateral relation towards to the both country will most likely to happen, ladies and gentlemen. Export, import, corporation, and so on, so forth. But last of all is that. Okay, talking about justification, ladies and gentlemen. They simply say that it is justified to damaging the sovereignty of the country the moment that's humanitarian crisis, for example, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. But I say that it is unjustified. First, because talk about sovereignty of the country is something that is an absolute and cannot damaging. Why? Because this where this sovereignty is occur because those country or society as a whole already sacrificing many things on how to get this sovereignty, ladies and gentlemen. For example, Indonesia. Indonesia has been colonized from the Dutch and so on and so forth. So Indonesian community fight for on how to be independent and gain sovereignty for a long time, and they have to sacrificing many things. For example, many people die, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So that is shows to you that sovereignty is not easily to get and not easily to damaging, ladies and gentlemen. But last of all, that what my first speaker explained to you, that why then by invasion it will be more harms because it will be triggering war, and there will be self-interest of who will invade those countries, ladies and gentlemen. So what you need to understand, talking about invasion, which country most likely to invade? Most likely is that powerful country mentioned like USA, Russia, China, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So those countries, why we think that they most likely have self-interest is that because those countries, they are manufacturing countries who really need like natural resources from the other country mentioned like oil and so on to support their economic circulation in their country, for example, and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So we say that by invasion, that invasion, it will be a triggering war. Why? Because the ally, because somehow what my first speaker explained to you, that each country that have the ally who will support behind on them and will support them the moment other country would like to attack and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. Mention like Syria, that by this invasion, for example, USA will directly invade the Syria to topple down the Bashar al-Assad, for example, ladies and gentlemen, because on how by the moment they already success to topple down the Bashar al-Assad position, perhaps they will be elected, the open of Bashar al-Assad who have same interest with USA will be elected and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So we say that by those kind of things, that in which Bashar al-Assad also have their ally countries such as like Russia, Iran, and so on and so forth, will not keep silent, ladies and gentlemen. Perhaps this Russia and Iran will do also attacks to the military troops coming from the USA. What I'm trying to say here is that those invasion will triggering war and will the moment this war already happened, what my first speaker explained to you, that there will be a long time process that will be create much victims by people dying and so on and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So in the comparative analysis, what my alternatives is that by diplomatic talk, ladies and gentlemen, in which we think that at least we talk about the diplomatic talk by giving financial, and after that, the moment there are not changes, we okay to. Dira.